I don't know about you, but most of my ham friends seem to be either HF or VHF or higher enthusiasts. But there's a band in the spectrum which falls between them, and that's 6 meters or 50 megs. And really, it's neither one or the other, but it can be kind of both. Our next guest is a long-time enthusiast of this band and joins us to share what's so magical about 6 meters. So it's a very warm welcome to Chris Deacon, G4IFX. Chris, good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. Or good afternoon, I think it is, David.
Oh, yes, it is. You're right. Technically, we're just a minute into the afternoon. How are you doing?
High noon. I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. And, looking forward to talking to people about my favourite band.
Yeah, well, we're going to inspire them to do that. And this is just a reminder for everybody at home. We don't have much time at the end. So if you've got any questions for Chris at any time during his presentation, you won't be interrupting him. Don't be afraid to ask them on the YouTube chat channel. Ask them there, and I'll ask them either during the talk or straight afterwards, and it'll make sure that you stand a good chance of it being answered. But now, Chris, over to you. Tell us about the magic of 6 meters.
Yeah, hi folks. Thanks for joining me. Chris Deacon, as David just said, I've been involved in 6 meters, active on the band for a very long time. So since the sort of mid '80s, which was when we first got access to the band in the UK, and now I'm chairman of the UK 6 meter group as well. So you can expect the odd little advert for the UK 6 meter group at various points in this program. What got me into 6 meters was actually a thing called DXTV, discovering that you could pick up TV pictures from around Europe sometimes in the middle of summer on the VHF range. As David said, it's somewhere between HF and VHF. So sometimes it exhibits the characteristics of VHF. In fact, Tropo was discovered in the 30s or 20s in the 6 meter range. And sometimes it displays the characteristics of the HF band. And it's fascinating. I would say that, wouldn't I? But it is. Now, most of you, I wouldn't mind betting a large proportion of you have an HF rig, and virtually all of those actually these days have 6 meters on them. In the old days, they didn't. I had to build a transverser, but because we were the first people in Europe, first significant country in Europe to get access to 6 meters, as I say, 35 years ago. But now it's spread across many more countries. Most of Europe now have activity on 6 meters. But I bet those of you with 6 meters on your HF radios, quite a lot of you don't operate on 6 meters. Either you've never tried it or you've had a quick look. And people say things like these, that there's no DX, we're away from sunspot. Well, we know we're at sunspot minimum, don't we? We're acutely aware of that. And there's no DX. Not true. Whenever I check the band, there's nothing there. That might be true. There's no activity is definitely not true, but it all depends when you look. And if what you do is switch on 6 meters for 5 minutes every week, and there's nothing there, and then you go away again, it's not surprising, I'm afraid, that you won't actually hear anything or see anything. You have to search for it. You have to be looking for the DX. You have to be catching the wave. I like to think of it as the difference between flying to the top of Everest on a helicopter and climbing. So why do we do it? And it is actually called the magic band, by the way. That's not, I didn't make that up. Globally, all over the world, people call it the magic band because things suddenly appear out of nowhere, and that's the point of it. Hopefully you can hear that. For the cognoscenti, that is the original thing from the 60s and 70s to Mission Impossible.
Very cool.
Yeah, I know. For those of us of a certain age, now, it depends what amateur radios are very broad church. People do it because they like technical stuff. People do it because they like talking to people. People do it for all sorts of reasons. And if what you're interested in is having plenty of relatively easy contacts around Europe, then go on 20 meters. If you like working special event stations, go on 40 meters. If you like rag chewing, and discussing your ailments, 80 meters. So all the over 70s are now turned off, but never mind. But what gets me going is all about how the signal gets from where you are to where the other guy is, if you see what I mean, and vice versa. I'm just trying to click on my pointer here, failing miserably. Yeah, what gets me is here we go. Is finding ways of poking my signal around the world. That's what gets me going. Whatever band I'm operating on, and 6 is a really good place to do that. So, as I said, it's the magic band signals come out of nowhere. Now, the main mode, the main effect in the ionosphere that gets our signals from where we are beyond the sort of local range is a thing called sporadic E, which you may or may not have heard about it. And certainly now, in fact, through most of the solar cycle, sporadic E is the main mode for working DX on 6, and to a slightly lesser extent 4 meters, and obviously occasionally on you can work with DX on 2 meters with sporadic E as well. So you're sitting there, you're listening to white noise or a bloke up the road, and suddenly this.
Yes, Patrick. Very, very fine copy, and thanks for the report from England. G1 Tango Mike Delta, Ocean Hotel 1 Mike Delta ready.
So a strong signal in Europe just sort of appears. Sporadic keys like that, it's called sporadic for a reason. It's very difficult to predict. We know roughly what time of year it happens. We know roughly what time of day it happens. But you can't date definitely tomorrow. You won't look in the propagation forecast in Radcom and see it's going to be sporadic key tomorrow, because you can't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So a single bounce off the ionosphere will take you out to about 2,500 kilometers. So that's about, from the south of England where I am, the distance to Malta, 9H1. If you wanted to go to any further than that, you need more than one bounce, a bit like this.
Over. Roger, QSL 5 and 773 from Papa Juliet 7 Mexico.
Yeah, so Papa Juliet 7 Mexico, it was the expedition in the Caribbean, and that's actually quite common in the summer for us to be able to work the Caribbean and North America and so on, and that would have been 3 hops, probably 2 or 3 hops, depending on how long each hop was, 3 or 4. So that's how we can get longer ranges. And in fact, you can work out to maybe 10,000 kilometers into the Far East on sporadic E, which is quite magic when it happens. But of course, you can imagine that if one hop is very intermittent, second hop's going to be intermittent, and the third hop is even more, and multiply those together, and it's actually you have to be in the right place at the right time. And that's what the thing to remember about 6 meters in general, sporadic E in particular, is that you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And in fact, sometimes a person with a fairly basic station can work something that somebody 10 miles up the road or 20 miles up the road with a much bigger station can't hear. That's the way it works. It's very localized sporadic E. The signals fade up and down very quickly, and they move, and the footprint of it moves around. The other end of the sporadic E scale is what we call short skip, and that does happen every summer as well.
Golf 4, Juliet, Charlie, good evening. Looks like you've got a 5 and 9, no problem at all copying you here. And Italy Oscar 68 Whiskey Foxtrot, and the name is John.
Right, so that's the signal from the north of Scotland, the northwest of Scotland, received in the south of England. GM3JIJ John, unfortunately no longer with us, but a very well-known character on the band at those days. And the shortest I've ever worked on sporadic E is about 400k, I think, basically. So when I was in the northeast of England, I could work the south coast occasionally, south coast of England. So the other really interesting and exciting Well, there are several actually. Other ways of communicating on 6 meters.
Locator here is Propagation 66. Propagation 66, name is Jeff. Juliet Echo Foxtrot Foxtrot. Golf 7 Alpha. Juliet Tango VK8 Golf Fox, over.
So, what we call F2, I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by F2. But this is another sort of reflection from the ionosphere, higher up, a higher reflecting layer in the ionosphere, so the signal actually in one bounce goes further. And with the same number of bounces, you end up further. So Australia, as that was by this thing called F2. Now, that only happens near the sunspot maximum. So you won't be getting that right now. You won't hear any of that. But it has happened, and it will happen. It will happen again. A couple of other interesting modes. There's lots of different ways of getting a signal from one place to another.
This is Oscar November 4 Kilo Sierra Tango calling North America, mate.
So the guy who recorded that, well, obviously ON4 KST was beaming towards North America at the time, so beaming something north or west probably. The person who recorded it was also beaming west, but that was a strong signal. I don't know if you noticed, there's a slight sort of echo on it, and it was being bounced back probably from the surface of the sea out in the Atlantic back up to the ionosphere and back. And that's actually it's actually a good indicator that there's propagation coming to the west, particularly to the west, because there's not much else there. And another sort of backscatter, backwards reflection signal is aurora, which we will start seeing more of now as we move in towards the next solar maximum. You and the other guy, the other person, are both beaming north and reflecting it off the electrons in the ionosphere, which form the aurora borealis, the northern lights. So that was GM3JIJ again. Now, no, he didn't have anything wrong with his transmitter. That's what the aurora does. These electrons are moving very fast, and they're moving in a range of different directions. And the effect is that the Doppler shift, it spreads the signal out. So in fact, my preferred mode of transmission for working aurora is Morse code, is CW, because but even then, your pure single tone transmission ends up sounding like a shushing noise. 6 meters is particularly good for aurora, but obviously it also works on, well, you may well know, but it also works on 4 meters and 2 meters, and I think it has even been worked on 70 centimeters. And then there's a few more, which I won't go into in any detail. You can, there's an aurora, there's a sort of a sporadic key that happens in the far north. There's TEP, which is a sort of F2 type of thing, but happens across the magnetic equator. Meteor scatter bouncing off the ionization trail left by a meteor as it burns up in the atmosphere. Scatter and moon bounce, although it's not a particularly easy band to do moon bounce on because of the size of the aerials. So just to explain a little bit about the way that these signals get back to you. I'm not trying to blind you with science here, but it helps to have some sort of vague idea. So this is a diagram showing the layers of the ionosphere going up. Here's the height above the ground in kilometers, and this is the daytime, and this is the nighttime. And to sort of get it in perspective, here's an aircraft right down here, and here's Mount Everest, and here's a satellite. And in fact, the International Space Station, which a lot of us would have seen as it's a bright object crossing the sky, is at about that height, just under 400 kilometers. And you see this thing that's the shape of a face. You know, I only realized the other day that it was in the shape of a face, but it is. The parts of the ionosphere, the electrified, ionized layers in the ionosphere, are at the turning points here, and the strongest one generally is at the nose of that face. The F2 layer, that F2, and I said before, in fact, all of the ionospheric layers apart from sporadic E, which I'll talk about in a second, are directly linked to the solar cycle. They depend very much on solar activity to make them work. So F2 only really works for 6 meters around solar maximum, well, we hope it will again. Is all I can say. And the point is that the higher the frequency, the denser that layer has to be if it's going to reflect back down to the ground. So it has to be very dense, and that's driven by lots of extreme ultraviolet from the sun. And the F2 layer only ever gets that intense. So the maximum, the F1 layer, E layer, the normal E layer never do. But sporadic E is different. It's actually formed by a different process. It occurs at this sort of level that I'm just highlighting here, around the same level as the E layer. But that's about the only connection with the E layer. It's actually formed by a completely different process. It's actually the ionization ultimately comes from meteor dust, people call it sometimes. You know, it's metal ions rather than the gaseous ions which are up here. They last a lot longer, and also there's an effect in the ionosphere there. Well, more than one effect, but in particular in mid latitudes where we live, it's wind shears, the neutral, ordinary weather, except of course that it's very high up. And if Jim Bacon was here, he could tell you about how pressure waves get from down here to up there. And you can see I've marked in the sporadic E layer on here, because it's being compressed into a very thin layer. In fact, it's in patches, which can be a few kilometers wide, and they can be 100 kilometers wide, and they can be a half a kilometer, maybe a kilometer thick, to maybe 5 or 10 kilometers. They're that thin, but they're extremely dense, and so they do actually reflect 6 meters much more regularly than the F2 layer does. I've got a timer going here to make sure I don't overrun, because otherwise David will cut me off in my prime.
You're okay, actually, Chris. You're doing fine at the moment. It's a good time to come in, though, mention a couple of things, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Just, a couple of things. You mentioned Jim Bacon just then, and Jim Bacon has actually just done a talk on VHF propagation and weather on the other channel, but because we've had to cancel one of the talks planned for later in the afternoon, it's at 4 o'clock, which was due to be on satellites, but unfortunately the presenter is ill. So Jim Bacon stepped in, and he's going to do another Why Radio and Weather Go Together for us at 4 o'clock. So if you're watching this and you'd like to know a bit more about something specific about sporadic E, Jim will be on later, and of course you can ask that on one of the questions. I hope you don't mind me mentioning that, Chris.
No, absolutely, David. That's fine. Also gave me a chance to drink a glass.
Yeah, I should give you a little drink break as well. Back to you.
Okay, so that's the sort of basics of it, if you like. And the other thing just to notice before I move on is that sporadic E can happen at any time of the day. It tends to be a daytime thing, but it also happens at night as well, when the nighttime or normal ionosphere doesn't really operate in the same way. All right, so as a summary, and sort of bear in mind that you know, what makes amateur radio different from going on the internet, to me, apart from the fact that we can build stuff and so on, is the way that the signal gets from where you are to where he is and the other guy is, and the other way around. So, and in summary, sporadic E, it mainly peaks in the summer, as I say, May to August in the Northern Hemisphere, the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere. And it also, and by the way, you don't need to be a propagation expert to be successful on 6 meters. You just need to know a couple of basic things. Sporadic E tends to happen May to August, particularly in the middle of that, June and July. It's not every day, but it's most days once you get into June and July. It tends to peak mid-morning and early evening, but it can happen at any time of day. Then we talked a bit about F2. That, conversely, is actually a thing that happens in the autumn and in the spring when it happens. Backscatter, which can be either Aurora, sporadic E or F2, And then there's aurora, which tends to happen around in equinoxes. So there's been a bit of that around recently. Oh, I should say that Sporadic has also got a minor peak around now. And in fact, there was quite a good opening in Europe on Wednesday this week. And it also has a bit of a peak around Christmas, New Year, and into January. Then there's a thing called transequatorial, which is a sort of specialized F2. Happens again in the same sort of period, maybe slightly longer around the equinoxes, and not now, but fairly soon that may start giving us contacts into South Africa and South America. And then meteor scatter, either a meteor shower or just random meteors, is happening pretty much all the time. And in fact, a lot of the contacts being made on 6 meters right now are by meteor scatter. So you don't need me to tell you the answer to this question. Where are we in the solar cycle? Well, we're right down here. This is the last two on the charts on the left here. The last two cycles. The green line is the smoothed total number. You have to use a smooth number because the daily numbers of sunspots and hence the radiation from the sun are jiggling up and down like nobody's business. It's like if you're trying to lose weight, if you weigh yourself every day, your weight will be going up and down by pounds from day to day. And you have to sort of average it out over a week or a month to really know whether you're gaining or losing weight. And it's a bit like that with the solar cycle as well. So we use these smoothed out average numbers. And my rule of thumb, that's the last solar peak, by the way, the one in 2000, 2001, 2002. This is the one we've just had, is that when the smooth number is above about 100, then we'll stand a good chance of getting F2 propagation east-west to North America and interesting places in the Far East. And you can sort of see why we didn't get much in the last cycle, cycle 24, because it only really got to 100 for a relatively short period. The chart on the right here is a sort of a blown-up version of the current cycle, the back end of the current cycle, and you can see that we are bubbling along the bottom. And in fact, the committee of experts convened by NASA have now decided that on the basis of all the different measurements and evidence and the shape of the curves, if you like, that solar minimum between cycle 24 and cycle 25 was in December 2019, so December last year. It takes quite a while because you have to see how the smooth numbers are working out. So we are now in the next solar cycle, and the only way is up. But it should continue, and there's a big debate about whether it's going to be a big peak or another peak, pretty much the same as the last one. Who knows? But you might think that meant that there was nothing interesting to work on 6 meters, and you'd be wrong. This is a picture from a very, very useful website run by ON4KST, which is an information sharing website. There are pages for various VHF bands and things like EME and stuff like that. But this is 24 hours, 1 day's worth of DX cluster reports from the 25th of May, so pretty early in the season this year. You can see there was loads of activity, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, because of course it's summer in the Northern Hemisphere. If you did it in December, it would be much more along the bottom. So yes, there is DX. Remember what I said, Sporadic is formed by a different mechanism. It's not driven by the solar cycle. It happens every year. And in fact, if anything, there's evidence that it's slightly better at solar minimum now, in other words. And certainly this year in the UK, from the UK, has been extraordinarily good. Okay, so that's the sort of background, if you like. That's the sort of general knowledge. Remind you again, you don't have to be an expert on all that stuff. You just have to know. It's about, if you like, it's a bit of luck, being in the right place at the right time that allows you to blow away that guy with the huge antenna and 400 watts 10 miles away. It's a bit of knowledge, just knowing roughly when to look, and it's a lot of persistence. it's keep on looking. These days with FT8, that is slightly easier than it used to be because, of course, you can just leave the receiver running and you can see what's been coming in. So it's a fact that FT8 is now the main mode for working DX on 6 meters. It doesn't mean it's the only mode, but it works extremely well. And in fact, it was sort of designed for the 6 meters in mind because the fading can be quite fast, and so they shortened the time period for each transmission. It's 15 seconds. CW is always better than SSB for working DX. Doesn't mean you have to do it. I've worked some really great DX on SSB, but CW is better. CW is about, I don't know, 15, 20 dB better than SSB in terms of the signal that you can read. And FT8, if you like it, is better than either of those. It's probably another 10 dB better. There is FM activity. I'm not really talking about that kind of thing today because of that. 6 meters is probably not that much different to the other VHF bands from an FM point of view. The range is slightly higher, slightly bigger, but there is FM activity. There are repeaters, and I'm quite looking forward to the opportunity to play with reduced bandwidth digital TV on 6 meters, but it depends on having a mode, a variety of digital signal that works when you're using the ionosphere.
Chris, if I could just break you just there, I'll give you a chance to have a sip or sup or something as well, because you just mentioned DXTV and that rang a bell. I'm keeping an eye on the questions that anybody is asking. By the way, it's a good opportunity. If you want to get a question to Chris, we need them before the end of his talk because the time goes really quickly, and you can do that on the YouTube chat. One person who's done that is Gregory, M0ODZ, and he said, does the DXTV still occur? So,
that's a good question, Gregory. A little bit is the answer. Most of the VHF TV in Europe has now shut down because it's actually, although most of the time it's a good area to transmit your TV signal. Actually, when those sporadic E signals are coming in, you get bars across the picture and all sorts of interference, so it's not great. But I gather they are still using DXTV. They are still using Band 1, as it's called, TV in the Ukraine, and they certainly are in Russia and in China, but that's obviously a bit further away. But I did see a report from a chap when I gave a talk a while back to a radio club. A guy actually sent a picture afterwards of a Ukrainian TV picture that he picked up. So there's a bit of it around, but the reason we've now got access so widely to 6 meters in Europe is actually that most of it's closed down.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Shall we move on?
Yeah, of course. Okay,
so how do you get started? Depends what you've got. I'm assuming you've got an HF rig. And like I say, anything made in the last 20 years has probably got 6 meters on it. It's certainly worth going on the band with relatively low power and a vertical or a dipole or a small beam. Definitely a preference for a small beam, by the way, partly because with a vertical particularly, but also to some extent with a horizontal dipole, you'll pick up more noise. You'll pick up quite a lot of noise. And we are trying to work signals that can sometimes be quite weak. So a small beam, if you can do it, which could be HB9CV or something like that, is definitely worth it. But don't let that put you off. If you've got a vertical, give it a go, because I can guarantee that in June, July, you will be able to work stuff in Europe from time to time. So a typical station might be a standard 100-watt transceiver and a medium-sized sort of beam. One of the advantages of 6 meters, actually, over even 10, which is twice the wavelength, or certainly 20, which is 4 times the wavelength, is that a beam antenna isn't as big. It makes, whereas a 20-meter beam would overhang the average suburban house enormously, a 4 or 5 element beam on 6 is actually quite tolerable. And then a high-performance station would be full power and a big beam. And I should say there's more information for beginners, as you can see at the bottom there on the UK 6 meter group website. So this is just to give you a flavour, and I don't want to blind you again with technology, but a lot of DX, as I said, is using digital modes. There are various different programs that you can use that all use FT8. They're all based on Joe Taylor's clever code at the bottom. And this is an opening to Japan, and this is using a software package called JTDX, which is like a version of the Joe Taylor software, but tailored for HF and the 6 meter DXing. This window here is the band activity window. It's where all the signals that I'm monitoring are coming in. There's a list of them there. This window here is the yellow bits are my transmissions, and the red ones are the people calling me. And this window here down the bottom is what they call a waterfall, a picture across the 3000 hertz, the 3 kilohertz bandwidth that the primary channel for FT8 on 6 meters covers. And each of those little streaks is a signal. You can see how many of them you can get in. There's about 50 hertz, between 50 hertz wide. Every single one of these signals on the way in is from Japan. I actually am a sad git. I counted them. There's 44 in that window, and actually it's scrolled off up at the top. Now this is a very unusual opening, but you can imagine how exciting this was. A lot of these signals were weak, so not every station, although actually the stations these Japanese guys are calling, you see their call signs there. The ones on the left is the station that they're calling. Most of them are in the UK, most of them are in G. And it's something called, which we only knew about 15 years ago, this actually happened. Summer propagation on the short path going very close to the North Pole. Nobody really knows why or how it works. Probably sporadic here at each end, but what happens in the middle? Nobody knows. Anyway, it got a name. It's called short path summer solstice propagation. It's really exciting. What a lot of people, they forget all this propagation nonsense. It's just exciting when it comes in. Another digital mode that's used a lot on 6, and this is definitely accessible to certainly the average station, that 100 watt station with a 4 or 5 element beam, is Meteor scatter, and uses a different digital mode. So I know there's a presentation shortly this afternoon about digital modes, so I won't try and second guess that, and don't worry if some of what I'm saying doesn't quite make sense. But and I don't do a lot of Meteor scatter, but this is using a mode called MSK144, which is designed for it. And instead of the waterfall type of display on that, we've got here a time display, so 0 to 15 seconds, and that's the previous 0 to 15 seconds. And there's a burst of signal coming through, and that's actually my signal as received by this guy, OK1 DIG. And ignore the fact it says 70 megahertz, by the way. It was actually on 50 megahertz. So just to give you a feel, this is the way that a lot of DX is being worked on 6. But I'll say it again. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. You know, clearly the guys there are people out there who've got much bigger aerials than me, and high power, but you know, there's not on average, the bigger your station, the more you're going to work. But if you try hard, look at this with QRP. See what this is, Robin M1DUD. See what he's worked. 2.5 watts. He's worked 61 countries, all the way down to 250 milliwatts. And I think he had a small beam. He's worked 28 countries, including TR8CA, hence the QSL card there. So you don't have to be a big rig, if you like, to be successful on 6. The band plan you will find on the RSGB website, but broadly speaking, and I just sort of try to give you a feel for what you need to know in order to go on the band. So the bottom end of the band is, broadly speaking, CW and SSB. The digital section, they call it machine generated modes, but it's digital. is 50.3 to 50.4, although there is still quite a lot of activity on a couple of frequencies which are strictly speaking outside that range. That's sort of custom and practice that hasn't changed yet. We have two frequencies that we use for FT8, 50.313 for general use and 50.323. We like, there's no law against it, but we like to reserve that for intercontinental weak signal working. And then there's a range for beacons, and there are a few other beacons at the other end as well. There are also contests. In fact, last night was the RSGB's a monthly cumulative contest, which happens on the second Thursday of every month. The band was full of G stations, some of them very strong, some of them quite a long way away. The 6 meter group, we also run a series of contests, a couple of marathons, which are designed to encourage activity, work as many squares as you can, particularly the winter one, because there is propagation, you can work stuff, and so we like to encourage people to get on. We have a more conventional contest at the beginning of June, and then there's a range of RSGB contests through the year. They're more VHF-y. How to be successful? So the openings are often strong, but they can also be very short and weak. You have to monitor. It's worth learning to recognize the propagation. If it's varying very quickly, if it suddenly appeared and then it suddenly disappears, it's probably sporadic, but also it can go on for a long time. Use early warning systems, and I mentioned that ON4KST website, which replays the DX cluster, but also has a chat function. But it is best to find it yourself, because you can get in there before the pilot starts. It's worth learning when to call in a pilot, and CW or FT8, if you can use either of those, you will work more stuff. That doesn't mean you have more fun, but you work more stuff. You need to be a good citizen, partly for everybody else's benefit, and actually partly because if you're overdriving your SSB rig, people probably can't really hear or understand a word you're saying anyway. So keep the gain down on SSB. FT8, being so narrow, is very sensitive to funnies like hum or power line ripple on your signal, which gives you a set of 50 hertz or 100 hertz sidebands. Watch what period you're transmitting in. We have a convention that Europe transmits first, in first period, in other words, from 0 minutes to 0 seconds to 15 seconds of every minute, and then from 30 seconds to 45 and so on, to both North America and Japan. Use the waterfall, because often you can see what's happening to a signal, where it's fading in and out or whatever, and transmit away. Don't call, most of the time, don't call on the same offset, the same audio frequency as the guy you're trying to contact, because as long as you get 2 people doing that or 3 people doing that, you reduce everybody's chance of actually being heard. Some useful resources I've mentioned ON4KST. There's a thing called the DX Desktop on the 6 meter group website, which pulls together a whole bunch of useful information for spotting DX. There's also dxmaps.com, which does something similar. And then for FT8, for digital modes, there's PSK Reporter, which is automatic reporting of received signals across the world, and very, very useful. Also very useful for finding out where you are being heard. You can actually see people spotting your signal. And obviously I would say this, wouldn't I, join the UK 6 meter group, but what do you expect me to say? Finally then, it is the magic band. It is magic when it kept going. You've already got a rig, a lot of you. You can get good results, certainly very worthwhile results with low power and simple aerials. Once you've started, it can be very difficult to let go. Viz me, after 35 years. Have a look at the UK 6 meter group website for more information, and don't forget to join. Thank you very much, and I'll be very happy to take questions.
Brilliant, Chris. Thank you ever so much. And we've got some good comments and questions, but as you've just said, if you've been watching this talk and enjoyed it, I'm sure you have, and you've got some questions or comments for Chris or suggestions on your best contacts and antennas and things like that, now's the time to do it. Use the YouTube chat facility to put your questions in now, and then we'll repeat them and read them out to Chris. One thing that's Tony G3OVH says, the amazing thing about sporadic E is the extremely strong signals it produces.
Yep, absolutely true. Or it can produce. Don't assume it's always strong. But yes, absolutely. They can appear out of nowhere.
And a few people, I did mention it before, have mentioned about Jim Bacon, who did a talk on propagation, which was just before this. Yep. But don't worry if you didn't get that, because there is going to be an extra talk today at 4 o'clock on why radio and weather go together by Jim Bacon, G3YLA. And I'm sure he'll talk about a bit about propagation then. And of course, you can always ask specific questions. So that's coming up at 4 o'clock today. Just sorting through the questions here. Is there a good mobile app, I guess he means mobile phone app, that you can suggest, or website that shows you when the best time and layer that's available at particular day and time for radio wave propagation, I guess on 6 meters? That's from Alex M7MEX.
Okay, Alex. Right, well, dxmaps.com, the one that I mentioned earlier, does actually have an MUF, a maximum usable frequency predictor, based on the spots, so that it will tell you roughly where the reflecting area is and where you can get to. It's probably more useful to, rather than trying to predict when it's going to be. I mean, as I say, you already know, I've already told you, it happens between May and August predominantly, and sort of late morning, early evening, which is quite good when you've just come home from work, actually. It's better to keep an eye on what is happening than it is to try and base it purely on predictions. But if you use your phone to access the ON4KST website and or dxmaps.com, you will get a pretty good, or indeed there's a DX cluster playback website as well. Forget the address for it, but you could Google that. That tells you what's going on now. I'll tell you something I do as well, and this works particularly well with digital modes, is that I actually connect to my own station, even if I'm somewhere else, or even if I'm in the sitting room, actually, using something like remote desktop from either Microsoft or from Google. They have remote desktop features, and that's not only can you monitor what your station is receiving. As I say, that's a great thing about FTA. You can see things coming in, and they're on the screen there for you. But you can actually easily, without having to worry about how the audio is going to sound and so on, you can actually easily work things via it as well. So that's another thing that I do to keep on top of what's happening.
Okay. We've got David M0JCO says, could Chris give his experience of the effectiveness of different antenna types for 6 meters? And thank you for the talk.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sort of verge on advertising, but there are a number of designs of antennas have changed quite a lot. VHF antennas and to some extent HF antennas over the last 20 years, and to quite a large extent minimizing the noise off the side and off the back of your antenna, or even off the top, because you get galactic noise from above as well, is probably more important, to be honest, than getting an extra 0.2 of a dB in terms of forward gain. So I have to say, I use LFA antennas. It's a public open source design that Justin G0KSC has produced, and so you can make your own, although I'm sure you know easily you've got a firm that actually sells them as well. There are some other, these days you can optimize antennas very well with computerized modeling, and you can really get that best compromise between gain and exclusion of noise off the side and off the back. So
funny you should mention that, Chris. Actually, if I can, then I'll plug in something else. At 3 o'clock this afternoon, we have a talk on this channel called Antenna Modeling with Mamana Gal and Steve Nichols, G0KYE. So if you want to model an antenna rather than having to build it, watch at 3 o'clock this afternoon on this channel. I'll give you another chance there to have another sip, because Mike Meadows has said, Mike G4GUG, lots of designs for 6 metre 2-element Moxons made from electrical conduit as a support on the internet. A good starter and a cheap antenna, he says.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And it might even be small enough, depending on the size of your loft, to have indoors. Yeah, so sort of compressed 2-element antennas like that, like HB9CV and whatever, totally agree. Much better than, I have to say, using a simple vertical.
Okay, Chris, on the same subject really, with restricted space, Chris G1JXS says, would a magnetic loop be effective on 6 metres?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly could be useful if you're wanting to null out on receive, to null out local noise. It wouldn't need to be particularly big either, but you won't get any more gain than you would with a dipole. In fact, less gain than you would with a dipole. So I wouldn't say it was the preferred antenna, but they do have a reputation for being good when you're really short of space, where there are other things around the antenna, like in a loft, and so give it a go.
Okay.
You'll definitely work things.
We're coming up to the end of our time now, so if you have got any more questions, this is the time to send them. Just one more I've got for you here in front of me from James M0JCQ. Hello, James. Thanks for a great talk, Chris. That JA pile-up was amazing. I need to read up on SPSS propagation.
Yeah, well, if you understand it fully, let me know, because there are various theories around about how it actually works, how the signal gets across that bit that's really close to the North Pole. But that particular opening was unique in my experience, in the sense that it was at midnight, whereas most of the openings we have to JA are our morning and their evening. This was our late at night and their morning. So it always pays to keep your eyes open, you know, because if I'd gone to bed at 11 o'clock, I would have missed it completely. Yeah.
David Howlett, I've just got you as an M0. My G5RV will load and is reasonably effective, he says.
Oh, great. Yes. And I mean, the only problem with a G5RV, in the right direction, a G5RV will be great because it's got gain. But it'll have gain in a lot of lobes. And they'll be pointing, they may or may not be pointing in the directions that you want, but I totally agree. And again, whatever you can put up, you've already got the radio, give it a go.
David just put his call up, by the way, it was M0VTG. Tim, M0BEW, says, what's your personal view of what's happening during the long haul multi-hop, sporadic E openings to JA, etc.? I guess that's what linked to that.
It is. It's going back to the SSSP thing, isn't it? Yeah. So there are theories around that say that the bit in the middle. So let's face it. We're going from here to JA is more or less in the direction of Norway from here. The sort of up the Scandinavian peninsula. And normally, I think every single time actually, when I've worked JA this year, you've also been able to copy Norwegian, Swedish stations. So I think the first hop is sporadic E. Probably at the other end, because actually Japan's slightly further south than us, it's probably one hop of sporadic E at that end too. But what happens in the middle? Yeah. So there's various exotic theories around that, for instance, a connection potentially with what they call polar mesospheric echoes, which is something associated with ionization associated with noctilucent clouds, which is just slightly lower in the ionosphere than sporadic E. Maybe, don't know, can't prove it one way or the other. There are also ideas that, well, it must be some kind of caudal propagation. In other words, you've got a layer here which is at an angle in some way, and a layer over there which is at an angle, and it just goes doing across the curvature of the Earth, and so you just got one reflection at one end and one reflection at the other. Hence, you get much stronger signals than you would otherwise. Maybe, but nobody really knows. I think actually there's a fair chance that it's actually sporadic E all the way, or a combination of sporadic E and auroral E. Because the other thing that happened during that big opening on the night of the 13th of July this year was that there was a magnetic disturbance at, I think it's about 11:15 at night, something like that. And what that does, magnetic disturbances can inject a whole bunch of electrons straight into the E layer and produce reflections there. And also there is a thing called polar cap sporadic E, believe it or not, that the professionals know about, which I've only been recently reading about. So my personal bet is that it's actually multi-hop sporadic E, but I wouldn't prove it one way or the other, and frankly, nor can anybody else.
All right. Well, maybe we'll ask Jim later, or at least our viewers at home will ask Jim later in his talk. But certainly today, Chris, you've told us what is the magic of 6 meters. I've often wondered when I see it on the, I've got a 756 Pro 3 and it says HF plus 50 megs. So as you say, it fits just in between them. And I'm sure you've inspired lots of people to have a go with 6 meters because it's got a lot of the benefits of VHF and UHF, but also some of the long hops and things that you can get with HF. Thank you ever so much for your talk today, and thanks to everybody as well for asking all the questions. And we wish you well. Chris, Deacon, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks. Cheers, guys.
All the best. Thank you very much.